version I'm showing you today should be available at those links soon. Let's go over the remaining portions of this checklist just to kind of tie it all off. Like we do have a few other areas in the checklist that are important. One is data protection. I'm not going to demo this today, but one of the probably more important things to do with Business Premium is to create and publish sensitivity labels. This is easy to do. I have a recommended set of labels for you in the guide that I think is appropriate for SMB. If you want something a little bit more complex, we publish a default label set on learn.microsoft.com. So in my guide, I'm recommending that you do have data classification for personal, public, and general. It doesn't include encryption, but it allows the content authors to classify their data to make it take appropriate actions. And then I also recommend creating a confidential category that is encrypted but shareable externally, and then a highly confidential that's encrypted, watermarked, and then generally kept internal. That set works pretty well for SMBs. And then, like I said, we need a little bit more. The default sensitivity label set that's published on learn.microsoft.com can be used for any customer, and that'll just include a more advanced set. So, for example, under confidential, there'll be a sub-label, one that can be shared externally that still applies the encryption and the watermarking, and that one is for FTEs only. So it's a great way, if your customer has concern about like sending internal emails, they don't want those emails forwarded to someone outside the company, you can use those labels and kind of lock that down. The nice thing with sensitivity labels, it takes full advantage of Azure RMS and Azure Information Protection, so that the encryption and the protection on the document travel with it. So if the document is emailed to someone who's not authorized to read it, they can't open it. Only the metadata is available to the recipient inside the document, which tell them about the document and where to get the keys for it, but they can't read the contents itself. Microsoft 365 Business Premium comes with a default DLP policy that's kind of is appropriate for use in the US. It'll protect against US financial information, but for any customer who has works in a regulated industry like healthcare or finance or uses PII type data, having a conversation about them on DLP policies is a worthwhile exercise. This is something that partners can and should help them out with. And then I really think it's important to consider retention policies along two dimensions. Mentioned in the guide is one is configure a basic retention policy, even if the customer doesn't have a legal obligation to retain data, mostly so that if people leave the company, they have enough time to search through old emails or old OneDrive data without necessarily maintaining a license for a user that's no longer with the company. So if you have the retention policies configured, like a base level 1 or 2 year for the customers, then that retention policy can be quite useful. And then certainly if the customer has a legal requirement to retain data, you can set that up for them as well. And they'll retain data across Exchange mailboxes as well as files stored in SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. As I mentioned earlier, we did have advanced sections of the checklist. These are for areas that we felt were really important. We just didn't want to overload kind of the initial set of work with stuff that could probably be thought of later. I just want to go through it quickly. I do think for some customers, using FIDO2 keys is a good idea for other users besides the break glass accounts. Other global admins could potentially benefit from this, or folks in key roles. And I say anyone with access to highly sensitive data or apps, it's a worthy consideration to have, and a good discussion to have with the customer if we need to do more with the FIDO2 keys. I do think it's wise to also think about securing the MFA and self-service password registration. And this gets into, when a user needs to configure their MFA or self-service password reset, where can they do it? Right? I usually get customers started with doing it wherever they're at because we have a lot to do, but then they may want to lock that down so that it can only be done from corporate network locations or with assistance from the partner, just to ensure there isn't ability for threat actors to compromise an account and then try to enroll it in MFA. The same kind of concept we think about with endpoint devices, like for customers that have a high concern for risk, they might also want to lock down where devices can be registered from. These settings aren't for every customer, because as you can imagine, locking down MFA registration and device registration creates more work. So this is really most appropriate for those customers that have a higher concern for risk and are willing to do more and effectively pay more for more security. That's so it's best suited for those types of customers, which in my experience typically fall to healthcare providers, oftentimes folks in professional industries such as legal or financial services. I think managing customer consent to applications and permission requests is a good idea. Many times users can be tricked in by potentially malicious apps into authorizing access to their user data that may not be appropriate. So this is a great way for you as the partner to provide value to the customer, where you can easily reroute these requests to you and then offer a service to your customer where your people just vet these requests to make sure that they're for apps and scenarios that are appropriate for the business, so that you don't run the risk of an end user getting tricked into authorizing or consenting to an application that has no business being in the environment. The last one on this list is to configure granular control of Azure AD external identities. So this is business to business. We've already covered turning on MFA for all the employees and users in the tenant, but what about guests? We don't. Your customers or you may not necessarily have control of the tenant that the guests are coming from, but with granular control of external identities, you can set requirements. For example, you can require that guests use MFA. They won't be using your customer's MFA, but they will be denied access to your customer's tenant if they don't have MFA configured, which I think is a really good idea. We have a little bit left on the advanced for email and apps. On the same token, we felt that these items on the checklist kind of most appropriate for those customers with a higher concern for risk and willingness to put more resources toward their security. The first is to configure the defense in depth for email security. So Ben Harris, who was on the call earlier, put together excellent guidance on all the considerations for really getting the most out of Defender for Office 365. And this is something that I think is really important to everyone on this call, is that Defender for Office 365 and Office Exchange Online Protection will not work properly if you have something else receiving the mail for your customer and you don't configure for it. And here's why. If there's a third-party filtering device receiving mail for your customer and then passing it to Microsoft 365, it's gonna interfere with the detection algorithms and give false positives for spam, and bulk email and potentially phishing, as well as false negatives for things that should stop. Okay, and then the solution to this is pretty easy. We have a feature called skip listing. So if you are using an appliance or some other service in front of Microsoft 365, where the customer's mail MX records are pointing to that thing first, we recommend you turn on skip listing. You simply inform Office 365 or Microsoft 365, Defender for Office 365 of the filtering service. Then it will correctly ignore the last hop from them and look into the mail headers before that, and it'll work properly. The other option is you can configure spam bypass, and you can tell Defender for Office 365 and EOP not to bother looking for spam or phish. It will always look for malware, so you can't turn off the malware filtering. But bypass is kind of skip listing is a much better idea, because you actually get the benefit of what your customer is paying for with both services. And the key takeaway here is EOP and MDO don't work properly if you don't have these configured and you have something else in front of M365, which is really, really common. I see this all the time with partners or using a proof point or something like that. And then they don't have the skip listing configured, and then they they're fielding constant annoyed calls from their customer on false positives and false negatives. Third recommendation here is to block all executable content. It's usually rare that SMBs have legitimate need to email around executable content. Now, when we talked about the standard protection policy before, that does turn on the common attachments filter, which filters, a lot of executable content and our most egregious macro types and EXEs and stuff like that, batch files. But it still allows some executable content. So if you want to, you can actually put in a policy that just blocks all executable content outright. I think it's a good idea. It's an advanced consideration though, because sometimes there are customers that would be annoyed by this policy or might interfere with some things. So I also recommend, it's an advanced topic, customize the quarantine permissions and policies. So there are many cases where you could take like a less risky email type, let's say spam or bulk mail. That you might have that configured to quarantine to kind of keep the user's inbox clean, but if it's just spam, it's probably safe to let the end user pull it out of quarantine without bothering you, right? So that would be a case where I'd consider that one. You can you can configure that, and that way for like low risk detection types, which would be spam, bulk mail, or low confidence phishing. And they see something, maybe it's a newsletter they were waiting for, they can just get it themselves. But I also recommend, on that same token, not allowing the end users to have access to malware or high confidence phish, because it's dangerous, and in those cases, it'll only allow the admins to release those content types. The third piece, or the fifth thing on our list here, is to customize the Defender for Office 365 anti-phishing policy. We showed that in the demo earlier. The standard and strict protection will turn everything on, but there's a benefit to actually adding additional impersonation protection for high-value users, your executives, board members, folks like that, because it'll not only add additional protection, but for impersonation, it'll also provide additional protection for anti-phishing. And an example of that is part of our anti-phishing technology is to look for patterns in emails. So, for example, if my boss asks me for something, right, that's pretty normal, and it probably wouldn't trigger an alert. But if the CEO of Microsoft asks me for something, that's not a normal of occurrence, right? And if you list your executives, that will oftentimes put a little more scrutiny on the phish detection to try to catch things that were out of bounds. And the last bit on this page is to extend DMARC protection to domains not in use. So lots of customers have parked domains on Microsoft domain. It's easy to turn DMARC on all of these. I recommend it. There's just one more thing, as we close doors for threat actors, they usually find and seek out more ways to get in and do things we didn't anticipate. So this is a very easy thing to do, to just close some more doors, to not leave domains potentially open for business email compromise that we didn't think were in use. For some customers, you may want to consider additional email encryption. For most, sensitivity labels is going to be perfectly adequate, but some customers may need a need for SMIME or something like that. So put this in the list just to have that conversation, check if this is needed or not. Another consideration is to restrict the external domains that can email Teams channels. So when you create a team or a channel in Team, Microsoft 365 group is created in the tenant with a valid email address, and by default, external parties can email that group. And this can be handy functionality for a lot of customers, but for some, this could also be a potential security risk. So it's just something to think about. If your customer doesn't need or want external parties to be able to email into Teams channels, this is something else you can close off for them. And last is to think about customizing the Teams meeting settings. For customers with a higher concern for risk, they oftentimes be very interested in what they can turn off and turn on with regard to what's possible for Teams, especially with guest users and what employees are allowed to do. I do recommend a little bit of caution here. Teams is a very useful tool, so I don't like to see things locked down so tight we take the usefulness out of Teams. But for those customers with high concern for risk, we want to also make sure that they're very comfortable using the tools, and sometimes turning down the settings a little bit can be useful. All right, so that is it for my checklist. I'm hoping everybody here gets a chance to download that today or tomorrow at the latest. You'll get the new version. This checklist is also available on our partner playbook site, and that link is at the bottom. This is a site to get all the training that our group produces, all the go-to-market materials that our partner go-to-market team comes up with for Business Premium. So this includes partner opportunity information, really compelling pitch decks for customers, lots and lots of training, both on security and other things. When I talked earlier about our frameworks training, that's all, most of the good stuff is posted out there. And so I did want to kind of close on a few key points we made earlier. Like, number one, the landscape has changed with regard to security. So increased IT complexity with people working in different places and increased sophistication of the threat actors has changed the game. So we really do need to up our game with security. In my opinion, EDR is a requirement now. It's not really an option. And we've also, the price of getting advanced security has also come down quite a bit. So these advanced security techniques are within reach of most of our customers. It's important to note that the most profitable, best-in-class MSPs, they make their money through managed services. We talked yesterday about Orland and sort of the opportunity there. I think it's just not simply enough to, sell and renew. That's important, but I think for MSPs, where they really add value for their customers is in the managed services, building services to deliver on what customers need. So oftentimes that's security services, watching out, making sure they're configured correctly, and someone's watching over them with regard to potential threats, managing authentication requests or things related to admin consent. That's a very easy managed service to get started with. We didn't really talk about SecureScore too much today, but SecureScore is another very easy service for our partners to get going with, where you can not only drive a lot of security value for your customers, it's a profitable business to be in. Adding Defender for Business has been a huge upgrade for Business Premium. I'm really delighted to see where Lighthouse has come. And I did want to make a point that Lighthouse is in its infancy still. We have a lot of progress. They made a lot of great progress, but we still have a lot that's going to come out. So, I'm really excited to see where they are today with the deployment steps, but I'm even more excited to see like the next wave that's going to come out very soon, where partners can start customizing, building their own deployment steps just to get this standardization applied to all their customers in an easy way. I mentioned before, we have a hands-on lab. So if you'd like to experience what this, going through the checklist as I did today for yourself and your own tenant, that is available. We don't have the hands-on lab today itself because there's too many folks on this webcast to do everyone at once. But there's a sign-up form at aka.ms/SMB lab sign-up. I've got 4 time slots where I'm available to proctor. You just pick a time slot where you're able to start. You don't necessarily have to start and finish within the time slot, but pick a time slot that's convenient for you. If none of the times that I've listed are convenient for you, there is an other category. You can suggest a time or two in that other category, and I'll see what I can do. So we have a few next steps for the folks on the call. One is, we wanted to make sure everyone's aware of our SMB Masters program. This is part of it. We have more content coming out the rest of the year, including quite a bit of advanced content on Teams rooms, more advanced security topics coming up through the rest of this quarter and the next quarter. For those with a sales-minded focus, I want to remind everyone we have SMB workshops where we will pay you to go find new customers for yourself and for us. Right? So there's a number of workshops that are eligible for SMBs where you just have to conduct the workshop. You don't even necessarily have to sell the software. We pay more, I believe, for the workshop if your customers do a trial. But just conducting the workshop in accordance with the guidelines is what we're looking for. And hopefully everyone's aware, we have a sales contest for Defender for Business, and I don't think we've hit the halfway mark where we're the link is aka.ms/train in Spain, just coming up on another slide. But we're offering an all expenses paid trip to Mallorca, Spain, for a training event with our product group, with the partner GTM and yours truly. So if you want to see us in Spain, check out that contest. I think you have to sign up like 10 new customers of 10 seats each or something like that to qualify, and then maintain qualification through March. And the first 100 to do that get the trip. And I think last time I heard we were about halfway there so far. So there's plenty of room for more partners to qualify for that contest. For today's talk, we had a number of links I wanted to remind everyone of. To get the 2023 version of what we talked about today will be at aka.ms/SMB security guide and aka.ms/SMB security checklist. They will also be posted on the playbook site, which is aka.ms/M365v497EXT partner playbook. It's on the far right-hand side of the page, under the, I think the getting ready to the training piece. There's also a Defender for Business partner kit. This is an excellent resource. The customer pitch deck on that site is absolutely excellent. If you learn that pitch, you take a little bit of time to study that. It makes a very compelling customer pitch for a customer on why they need MDB. And then plus there's pitch decks for IT decision makers, plus a lot of other readiness material for partners, and even a cool sizzle video that kind of takes our home security analogy and puts it in a nice little 3-minute video for you. I talked about CDX yesterday. If you're not using CDX, this is probably one of the second most important partner tool you need to be aware of. You can get 2 things from it. One, you can get software tenants. So you can, the tenants I was using today are CDX tenants, which are, it's a 90-day trial of Business Premium or M365E5. You can select from several of them. You can get MDB standalone there. You can get a 90-day trial of that. But most importantly, it comes with users and data already preset for you. So it's purpose-built for demos, but it's also very useful for learning. The other half of CDX is called experiences, where we list out the exact steps you need to take to conduct a demo. So if you're not super comfortable demoing MDB today, you can just grab the guide and it will tell you what to say. It'll tell you what to click on. It'll tell you which tenant to get. And you can become a demo pro on pretty much any Microsoft technology that we have. I mean, I think there's hundreds of demos in there, not just MDB and Business Premium. So if you wanted to do a demo on Intune or Power Apps or whatever, I know those are in there. So it's really super handy. All right, last, I wanted to close as promised. We have tried to come up with a list of all the links used here for those who missed them. I'm going to leave this page up here for a moment, just so anyone can grab any links that they may have missed during the presentation. And while I leave this up, I just want to thank you for spending your time with me today. I've enjoyed it. I hope you've liked the approach we've taken with this this version of the guide. And I would like your feedback. So, if you have suggestions, suggestions, corrections, ideas, I'd love to hear from you guys. My email's on the front page of the guide. You can just email it to me. And with that, I'd also like you to take a survey. So thank you for your time. Thank you for spending your morning, evening, or afternoon with me. If you could, let us know how we did on the survey. We'd love to hear your feedback to know if we're meeting the mark or if we're not, right? We do better. We'd like to know what we're doing well and what we could improve upon. So please fill out the survey if you have a moment. And thank you.
Thank you, David. Just a reminder to the audience that the recording and a copy of the presentation will be published on the M365 Partner Readiness Hub within 7 to 10 business days. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenter, David, for a long but wonderful presentation. And thank you, audience, for joining us today. Please stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day. See you tomorrow.
you.